It's time to get democratic. Let's jump into dot voting using Mural. And as I've mentioned or pointed out, you can indeed run voting sessions in Mural. And this is probably one of the most important and most used facilitation features that you're going to have to implement when you run your activities. Now, what is important to note though, before I get into the functionality, is that if you imagine yourself, and perhaps you've done a couple of these in-person sessions, is that the idea is that you give people a set of votes or a number of votes, and they can go and then, let's say, vote on a bunch of concepts that you've put in front of them, and that helps you prioritize things. Now, in the real world, this is really easy to do because you maybe have a couple of pieces of paper hanging on the wall, and it's pretty obvious where people have to stick their stickers to make their votes. However, when it comes into the digital world, you need to be a little bit more careful because you have to control where people can vote. Because remember, everybody is standing in front of this big virtual whiteboard and they have these digital votes in their hand and they can place it anywhere. So they can vote on the header, they can vote on sticky notes, images, whatever, and you need to control that. And that's even more important than activating a voting session in Mural. And I'm going to show you how to do all of that right now. So how do you actually, and where do you find the voting element? So if you go over to the top here, as usual, you see all your superpower features sitting over here, and there you have your voting functionality. Now, before I activate this, I actually created a little scenario over here that I'm going to use to demo how I set up a voting session. Now, to just set up my scenario properly, I have a whole bunch of elements over here, and as I tried to explain earlier, if I don't do this properly, I can actually activate this and people can vote on anything on this little feature set here. They can vote on a hamster, which I would love them to do, but actually I want them to actually highlight and prioritize these 3 ideas that I have here on the canvas. So how do I control that, and how do I run a voting session to prioritize and decide which idea my team needs to select? Great, so we're going to go up to the voting feature over here, and I'm going to activate this little element over here. And I'm going to start a voting session, the first feature or function link that I have over here. When I click that, it's going to bring up a little pop-up that's going to help me control and set up a specific voting session. Something that I need to point out is that you can run multiple voting sessions in Mural in a specific canvas. And then the other thing that I need to say is that you can actually run a voting session, leave the canvas, and come back later a couple of days and then end the voting session. So the voting session or running a voting session is even awesome when you run asynchronous meetings. So go ahead and use this feature. Great. So how do you set this up? The first thing you want to do is you want to name your voting session because you're going to build a little archives of votes. And perhaps you want to come back and find this one again. So be descriptive. So I'm going to go demo vote number 2 because I've done a couple of these before. And the second element that you control over here is how many votes do people get. So if you imagine and use my analogy of the dot votes in the real world, how many stickers do you want to give to people? Why is that important? If you're running, let's say, design sprints or ideation in design thinking, sometimes you want to give participants, people voting in the activity, the ability to vote on multiple items or give them multiple votes. This is where you control it. So for each person participating in the vote, how many votes do you want to give them? And you control that here. So you can increase and decrease the number of votes here. I'm going to just leave it on 2 for this demo and show you how that works. The second element that you control is who can actually end a voting session. Remember, I'm going to show you in a second, I'm going to activate the voting session as a facilitator. But then as a facilitator, at some point, I need to say, okay, guys, we've received enough votes or we run out of time, the timer has run out, let's end the voting session. And then I need to click a button to end that. However, you can also set that any person in the canvas can end the voting session. Perhaps you have a little bit more of an intimate team, everybody's got a bit of control and you want to assign that ability to anybody. But for the most part, you will probably leave it on only facilitators can control or end a voting session. Now, here is one of the most important features when it comes to voting. Now, remember my long story at the beginning, I mentioned that if you start a voting session, if I had to start it right now, people can actually go around with their virtual sticky notes and stick it everywhere, little sticker votes. They can vote on the header, they can vote on my photo, they can vote on anything. You want to control what people are able to vote on. And this is what this little control area here enables you to do. So what you'll see here with these little tick boxes, it represents all the content that people are able to vote on. So for example, files, areas, images, any content that people are able to vote on. So for example, a titled area. Title areas is actually great to vote on if you want to create clusters, but more on that later. Anyways, so usually what I do is I come in to control myself and say, listen, let's just clear everything out. I want people to be able to vote on these 3 sticky notes over here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to activate and say, listen, only sticky notes. People can cast a vote on sticky notes. Now, with that being said, perhaps I need to keep in mind that on this canvas that I'm sharing here, there's multiple sticky notes. Of course, there's my 3 ideas, but I have a whole set of sticky notes all over the canvas. And if I activate the vote now, people can still go out and vote on any area or any sticky note on the canvas. I want to control that. This is where this last element comes in. So where to vote. So I can allow people to vote anywhere on the canvas. So perhaps you've set it out that all the ideas are located on the canvas and they can indeed do that. But for the most part, you want to control what people vote on. So you want to click here and say selected area. And that's exactly what I've done. That's going to take you to the next step. So if I click on next, what will happen is that you'll have the ability to actually control the demarcated area of the vote. So I can clear out this little box, make it larger. But for the most part, here is all the sticky notes. So I can't vote outside this box. Only with this area that's highlighted here, I can vote. So my 3 ideas are there and my box is nicely set up and I'm ready to start my vote. Other element I want to point out, and this is kind of persistent when you're running votes, you'll see this as a facilitator, is that there's a little top bar here that contains some additional information. So here is a little bit of a highlight. Okay, I know that there's 2 votes per person. I can go back and edit that if I wanted to, but I'm now able to start the voting session. Once I hit the start, and sometimes it takes a couple of seconds, the voting session will activate. You'll see at the background there, it took me to the area that I demarcated, but then also everybody, not only the facilitator, will get this little pop-up that you see over here. This pop-up indicates to everybody that the voting session is now active. It gives you a little bit of instructions of how to add content here if you want to. And once you're ready to start voting, you can dismiss this and start your voting session. Now to vote, and this is for everybody, not only the facilitators, all you have to do is click on a sticky note and you'll see that there's a little indicator here that I've indeed now done a vote on this sticky note. Of course, I can go over and click here and add my second vote, or if I right click, I can remove the vote and then add it to idea number 2. Now, as a facilitator function, I want to point out one important element here for you. And this is persons voting at a specific period of time. Now, at the moment, I only have a visitor with me here in the canvas. You can see that the visitor, and this is a dormant visitor, he's just hanging out here on the side, is not doing anything, he's not participating in the vote, and he's got 2 votes left. That will count down as this person starts voting. Now, you will have a much longer list that this will be represented by everybody who's currently active in the canvas. And this is great as a facilitator, is just to have a look at this list to see who's currently voting and where's the activity. Perhaps when you're running bigger sessions with 50, 60, 70 people, you're not going to wait for everybody to finish the vote. This area is great to see where you get critical mass and when you can end the vote, or because you can see people's names here when they're members, you can actually just prompt people to say, listen, hey, Bob, are you having a problem voting, or is everybody finished? I can see there's about 5 people that haven't voted yet. Is there a problem? What can I do to help you? You can kind of prod people along to get a feeling for who's voting and who's not been voting. Now, after this, I'm just going to close that down. The session is running. People can vote and interact. And now I'm going to end the voting session. By ending it, I click on this little button over here. It will end the voting session. I'll get a prompt again to make sure. I'm going to click this, and this is all functionality for the facilitator. I click the end voting session, and then automatically what happens is the actual results page pops up. Now, there's a couple of things I want to point out here. Of course, the most obvious is that the results sits here, and usually this list will be a bit longer if you have a larger voting session, but then also you have the ability to see all the sessions that happened before. So I ran a little test before. I can access this little vote that I've done before, or I can go back to the most current vote and then have the results and review the results over here and get an idea for where people's thinking is at. Now, the second thing I want to show or point out is that I'm not able to actually dismiss this. But then what you'll see is this bar here is pervasive. It sits here, but it's got a specific functionality. Now, what's cool about the voting session is that even though I've dismissed the results, I can still see the results indicated here as little dots on the actual sticky notes. So if you keep this bar active, you can still see what people have voted on. It gives you a little bit of a visual indicator of the voting results here. I've had an older voting session, so if I click on that, it'll activate in this round, idea number 1, it got 2 votes. You can see that's active, so I can toggle between that. However, I might be tired of seeing that visual indication. I can go over here and then dismiss this bar. Now, at a later point, you might want to see the bar again, or maybe get to the results. How do I do that? Once again, I'm going to point out, you go up to the top here, and if I click down here, you'll see there's a little bit more functionality that is available to you within the voting element. So you can start a voting session. This is the one we just did. I can go in and I can actually see the results page again. So for example, if I want to get back to the results page, that's what that hyperlink does. I'm going to just dismiss that again. If I go back in there again, I can go and actually show the votes. So that'll bring my bar back. So I'm going to do that just to demo that that's working. So I can see these little icons again. And of course, I can go back in here and I can go and delete a voting session. So if I click on that, it's going to give me access to which voting sessions. So I can tick that over here. I can decide which ones I want to delete and then remove it completely from the results page. I'm going to just leave them there for now. So this is kind of a bit of an overview of all the functionality that is available to you as running voting sessions. They're awesome to get a quick feel for how the room's feeling, so it doesn't have to be super formal. The other thing that I want to remind you though is that I didn't mention that in the demo is that you can run the voting session in conjunction with the timer. So the timer is not going to affect the end of the vote. You as a facilitator still need to end the vote, but it's a great way to just give people a little bit of urgency when it comes to voting. As easy as that. I hope you're going to give it a try.